Hi, everybody. I'm coming to you from Germany this morning. Oh, well, this afternoon for you, this morning for me, to give you a small, very brief introduction to what I do as a test developer, and in particular, the role of CEFR in designing tests. And I know you're probably all excited to get to the AI part, but behind the AI, what lies there? Yeah, so my job is to show the sort of nuts and bolts behind the technology that go into making a language test, and in this case, an oral exam. So that's kind of basic it. I could talk for hours about the CEFR. I'm a huge fan. Unfortunately, I have to condense it. So we're just kind of jumping right in. To the CEFR and to show you then how we designed just a sample task. And we'll also look at some students, some test takers' performances. Okay, so you should see my screen now. Okay, so just a very quick reminder of the CEFR. As you know, it's 20 years it's going now. And the Common European Framework of Reference is now used all over the world and is a benchmark and a standard for test development, assessment, and curriculum design, material design around the world. So for me, the strong features of the CEFR is that it uses clear, action-oriented language. It's all based on these can-do statements, looking at what students can do rather than what they don't do. It covers all modes of communication, from reception, production, interaction, and mediation. And as you see here from my image in the middle, it progresses through six core levels. And I love this diagram here because I think sometimes it's shown kind of as steps. And I think it's kind of misleading because we don't step and leave one level behind as we develop our language skills. But in this circle, it shows, we grow into more grow into our proficiency. So our A1 becomes A2, but still includes our A1. I love this image. I think it's a really good representation of how we develop. And the other point I have here is that it focuses on communicative outcomes rather than grammar knowledge, which is very hard for us sometimes as teachers. We teach so much grammar, we want to focus on the grammar, but it's what they can do. So moving one step beyond this, kind of what we all know about the CEFR, is just to look at some of the descriptors. And as I said before, we can find it hard as teachers to assess our learners, and we tend to focus on often on absence. We focus on what's missing, what's lacking, and we would say there is a lack of vocab errors, so they're very good, or there's a lack of unnatural phrasing, so that means they're very good, or there's no pronunciation that really impedes comprehension. But if we're focusing on the lack, we're missing the presences. So instead of focusing on the absences, we should focus also on the presence. And that really defines the language skills. We need to have complexity in our structure, in our vocab. We need, beyond pronunciation, we need intonation. This really defines the master, the mastery of a language. So just looking here, we see the CEFR gives us descriptors in such detail. I'm just picking two here to show production, for example, what tasks language learners can engage in. And I just picked out two here as an example. Monologue, so the speaking. It's broken down into the different types of monologue. So for example, what we're looking at now will be describing experience and putting a case. Now, they require completely different skills. Describing experience may be more informal. It might produce, if you ask someone to tell you about their last holiday or something that happened to them, they may produce different language. They're looking past, they're looking back. Putting forward a case asks them to justify something. to explain, they may be more formal in their language here. But just as a quick reminder that the CEFR tells us to look at beyond just give a presentation or something like that. It gives us all this fine shade and this detail. On the other side here, we have the competences, communicative language competences, and these ones will tell us how well they achieve the tasks. So it's not enough asking them to describe experience. We then look at their vocabulary range, their grammatical accuracy, phonological control. But in particular, we're going to look today at the sociolinguistic appropriateness or coherence and cohesion. So there's a lot of things going on as a teacher to try and assess all of these things. It's very difficult. And a lot of it lies on the task we create. And, sometimes in class, we might get our students to do a presentation or something like this and answer a few questions. We may be limiting what they're producing. So I'm just going to show you one task that we created for the dynamic speaking test, and just to show you how we used the CEFR. So you can see here the task, question 4. So this is moving up in this exam. This is moving up kind of in complexity, and it should be aimed at, say, the B1, B2 level and beyond, of course. Everyone should be able to do it, but really we're kind of looking, this is some skill needed here, because although the question seems quite simple, your friend wants to share a flat with you, but you don't think this is a good idea. Tell your friend why, giving reasons. Suggest a different solution. It's very short, but there's actually an awful lot going on in there. So you can see, firstly, it's sustained monologue describing an experience. You may describe a personal situation, give background to a decision. So that could be why you don't think it's a good idea to share. You're putting forward a case. You're going to justify why you don't want to, why you're rejecting their suggestion. And you can talk about other plans, talk about decisions, why, and give, your kind of, as I said, justifying and explaining, giving background information. It also includes an element of goal-oriented cooperation, although in this oral exam, the other person will not be responding. You're setting it up as though you're expecting a response. So you're kind of negotiating with them, proposing solutions. So they're the things that we're asking them to do. But then when we're looking at it, we're going to look beyond the language, the complexity of grammar, etc. We also want to look at coherence and cohesion, using because, but, and so to connect ideas and reasons smoothly. They're giving this monologue. It's maybe a tricky situation, hence the sociolinguistic appropriateness. Handling delicate social interactions, disagreeing, suggesting, softening message. So, and that's just 5 of the descriptors that this little task links with. But it just shows you the complexity of what's going into designing the task, but also what we're expecting. So if you design the task in this way using the descriptors, you are looking for a complete different production than you would be if it was, talk about your last holiday or something like that. So that really is just a brief introduction into the CEFR, digging into the descriptors, and then individually picking some descriptors to help us create tasks. Now, of course, what we put in, what we use to design is also what we use to evaluate. So we're going to be looking at how well they describe a situation and give background, how well they justify the viewpoints, how well they propose solutions, etc. So we're going to look at one test taker's performance now, and I've included the transcript, the audio. We're going to listen to it and you can read along with the audio, and then I'm going to ask you, what do you think? And you'll be able to share your idea in the chat with me very briefly. But what do you notice, and what kind of level would you think? And this is a tricky one, I'll warn you in advance. Okay, so, oh, I did not.
I don't think this is a good idea because I'm not a person people that who's like cleaning, and I will more like to live with my mom, and I can suggest you to buy another department or something and to live by your own is more helpful to us because we're also having something our personal things or or work or something, and we also having a different university, so this is why we can share a flat.
I think the audio didn't pick up the can't share a flat. Okay, we'll give him that. So you can see here there's a lot going on, and this is very tricky. This is very tricky because we see a range of skills and ability in this one short recording. For example, if you I'll just give you a second just to look at it again there and kind of see what you think. He said some stretches where they sound quite fluent. I would imagine this person really has some experience, perhaps using English, maybe on a trip or spending some time abroad. But there's, they've got to buy another department instead of apartment. So there's a lot going on. But if we really look at the performance, where would we put it? So just zoning in here for a second on the overall oral production. Yeah, we would say it's probably, overall, is it A2, B1, just what they perform? We can see, for example, that, look at B1 there, can reasonably fluently sustain a straightforward description of one of a variety of subjects within their field of interest, presenting it as a linear sequence of points. I think A2 is a simple description or presentation. You can see that there's more ability. So I think it's A2 plus B1. If you look at B2, a clear, detailed description. Well, it wasn't. He didn't quite manage that. So I think that if we're looking at these descriptors here, we would probably, for oral production, overall, we would probably place it around the A2 plus B1. Yeah, so that's that. If we move over to grammatical accuracy, that's a tricky one as well. So if we look at A2, it says uses some simple structures correctly. Well, he systematically makes basic mistakes. There were mistakes, but we can see he kind of moves beyond simple structures. B1 would be uses reasonably accurately a repertoire of familiar used routines and patterns. It's a little bit, so I'd say it's probably again around the B1, maybe a B1 mid. There were errors. We saw stretches of ability there. Okay, so that was a really, really tricky example. I mean, for me as a teacher, if that was my student, I had to, assess this live, I would be, conflicted because I can see that I can see he has comprehension. He probably has vocab, but in this quick activity, he wasn't able to show me perhaps what he could do. And this is a quote from Brian North, who wrote the book, The CEFR in Practice. He's one of the people involved with the CEFR from the beginning. And he says, it's all too common to hear the opinion expressed that someone cannot possibly be B2 if their pronunciation or their ability to develop an argument is not B2. This is simply inaccurate. They may well be B2, but with poor pronunciation. This is something I think as teachers we struggle with. We see our students every week. We see them in class. We know what they can do. And sometimes in an exam situation, when we're stretching them, when they're asked to, push that little bit further, they don't produce what we expect them to do. So this is often a problem that the teachers have. And they say, well, I see the student every week and they're a B2. but their knowledge of the B2 as their student as being B2 is often based on, their reading comprehension and their ability to, respond quickly in class to questions. However, in this case, we're looking at something very specific, and we're looking not at, how well they understand a text. We're looking at how well they perform orally in these different challenging situations. Okay, so that was just a reminder that it is very difficult. We're looking at many, many things. The CEFR does provide these great descriptors that can help, as I just did, to kind of anchor our students. I've one more for you. So this is a student at a different level. Same question, so you're familiar now. Okay, we listen to the student and the same thing, and then we'll zoom in on two descriptors again.
Oh, Alice, as to your desire to share the flat with me, I was thinking about it. Look, I'd rather you find another place to live because, as you know, I have big family and my relatives often come to visit me, so they need extra place in my flat to live with me. Also, my aunt asked me to welcome her niece for her external examination, and while she is taking her practice in Calgary, so it might be busy. So if you want, I can help you, and we can look for a nice flat or room to share with someone else near me, so we can meet and spend a lot of time together.
Okay, that is a student now at a different level. She's mentioning Calgary there, so we could imagine that perhaps this student is actually living there, so probably using English in her day-to-day. So just to zoom in briefly, we would say grammatical accuracy, there were slips, definitely. So if you zoom in at the B2, good grammatical control, occasional slips and non-systematic errors, minor flaws in sentence structure still may occur. Okay, there were there. So maybe she's kind of there. C1 consistently maintains a high degree of grammatical accuracy. Errors are rare. So it could be maybe the good B2, perhaps a low C1 there in grammatical accuracy. And overall phonological control, we would say, can employ, look at C1 there, employ the full range of phonological features in the target language without sufficient control to ensure intelligibility throughout. So we could hear her accent, we can hear, but it's very easy to understand. So this is to show two different kind of test takers that we have. Some might be easier to kind of, identify their skills. Others will be more difficult. And just to round up there, the CEFR and the beauty for me is that these descriptors can be used by teachers, by test developers, by curriculum designers and material designers to bring transparency. So it says the purpose of the descriptors is to bring transparency to the aims pursued in teaching and certification, as this guarantees fairness and comparability in language testing. If we're using the same standards, the same benchmark, it brings this fairness, this transparency. So that basically really is the whistle-stop tour for you of kind of behind the scenes before I hand over to Martin of how we design these tests. So you know that there is the CEFR, there is a strong skeleton behind. So that's me finished for now anyway, but I'm happy, of course, to answer any questions.
Any questions from folks before we move into Martin's part of the presentation? That's fantastic. Laura, thank you.
It was very quick. I could go on for days. I could go on for days.
I know. I can feel you. You've got a lot more to give there. Okay, but that's a really nice underpinning for the second half of the presentation, Laura. Thank you. We'll, if I can now introduce, if we can switch over to Martin. I'd like to introduce Martin, who is the manager of the dynamic placement test and speaking tests at ClarityEnglish. Martin is an experienced publisher and writer of language learning and assessment materials, and has a master's degree in English language assessment at Cambridge University. So thank you for joining us at very early your time, Martin. It is appreciated. And I'll hand over to you for your piece.
Great, thank you very much, Ian. Yeah, look, it's a pleasure to be with you. And it was really useful to have what Laura said, because I think what we need to remember here is that with our test and with any test, that this is underpinned by standards. And so we've looked here at how the CFR standards are underpinning the way we evaluate students' speaking ability. But what I now want to look at is how AI helps us to do this in an automated way. So if I just share my slides. Okay. So what Laura was talking about there is the kind of things that when we come to training human markers, those human markers would have to take into account all of those criteria that we've just been looking at. So they'd have to understand the criteria for each task. And when they're listening and assessing, they're going to have to evaluate multiple criteria. And obviously, when we're training those markers, you're going to have more than one marker to assess most speaking tests because of the scale of what we're doing. Then you're going to have ways of ensuring that all of the markers are working to the same standards, working to the same levels, that they're consistent, and that their accuracy is appropriate. You know, that's a skilled task. You need skilled markers, and it's a time-consuming process. So how then do we go about training a machine to do all of that? On screen, I put 4 areas that I'm going to look at briefly in the next few minutes. So the first of those is speech recognition. Laura showed actually the transcript for the 2 sample responses that we heard, and actually this slide here, I've added in this slide, which is from one of our partners in Taiwan who's been using the test with her students, and she very helpfully did the job for me, which is he actually measured the reliability of the speech recognition system against both some kind of proprietary systems and as you see in the bottom right, also against human transcription, and she's put the reliability is greater than 95%, which I'm very grateful she's put that in there. The reality is that actually the speech recognition systems are not 100% accurate, and but that's also the case of human transcription. There's some interesting research which shows that humans' level of accuracy of transcribing, particularly non-native speaker speech, is definitely not 100% unless you listen maybe 3 times. So the level of the reliability of the speech recognition system is very definitely on the same level as a human would get in capturing what the speaker has said. But a really key point here is that the system is trained on non-native speakers, so that we have models from all around the world, so that it's able to recognize the different types of accent that your students might be producing. So once the machine has captured what the student has said, then it needs to find a way to measure, because this is a machine. It has to be able to assign some numeric values, if you like, to the features that it's going to assess, unlike a human. So these are the kind of 4 areas of linguistic competence that the machine will assess, and the machine actually takes on more than 50 micro features. So for each of these broad areas, there will be at least 10 micro features which help the machine to measure what the student has produced. So for example, in the area of fluency, what I mean by a micro feature is it could be words per second. I mean, that seems a pretty kind of obvious way of measuring fluency. How many words can you produce in a given period of time? But there will also be measures of how many silences there are and how long those silences last. But of course, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, good native speakers can have, good speakers can have pauses for for effect, to add to the way that they're going to communicate. But you will also have measures of, for example, the ratio of pauses or silence to the amount of time that the speaker is actually speaking. And those start to become good measures of the competence of a speaker. There's lots of research in these areas which show how the features correlate to good speaking competence. So if I look up just quickly at the next slide, so this is taken from not from our system specifically, but lots of systems work in very similar ways. This is taken from an academic article about a different system, but this shows just a few of the features that a machine could be marking. And as I say, there are more than 50 features in our system, and the point about these is that these have been tested out to show that they actually correlate well with the competence of a speaker. And these will look at pronunciation and measuring the accuracy of the speaker's pronunciation against an acoustic model. In the case of grammar, obviously we can be looking at the use of grammar features and comparing those with the CFR levels, and so on and so forth. So the machine will gather a huge amount of data about the speaker's ability in against a whole set of these features. But obviously those are just a set of measures. That's not going to tell you what somebody's CFR level is. So then we need to go through a process of actually mapping those measures against what we see as recognizable CFR competence. And the way that we've done that is that we've built a set of 5,000 sample responses which have been marked by human experts to start with. So this becomes a set of benchmarked responses. They're marked by a minimum of 2 separate markers, and in cases where there's a significant discrepancy between the 2 human markers scores, then a third marker would come in and give a mark there. So at the end of that process, you have these 5,000 responses which we are confident have been given an appropriate CFR score. And then this is where you come into the area of machine learning and big data, is that we can feed in, on the one hand, the 5,000 expert marked samples, but at the same time the machine can score all of those 50+ features for all of those 5,000 samples and build up effectively a map of how those features map across to CFR scores. In other words, there will be a certain X words per second as an individual feature might map across to an A2 speaker. Y words per second might map across to a speaker with a B1 level. And of course, on the scale here, if we have 5,000 samples of 50+ features, this is something that AI can achieve in a way that humans, that would be an exceptionally big task for humans to undertake. So from this process, we built up a picture that shows a very clear correlation between the student's performance and a CFR score, and we can give an accurate score to what the student has done. And I was showing those micro features in relation to linguistic features. Of course, the fifth element of this, the other element of this, is exactly what Laura was talking about, which is task achievement. Of course, what we want to do with our speaking test is not simply measure the linguistic features like pronunciation and fluency. We want to see how well our students can use spoken English to communicate, to achieve the task, to do something that we would consider would be like a real life activity. That's the goal of what we want our students to do with their language. And this is the area I think where AI has made the biggest leap forward in the last 2 or 3 years. So that's the kind of era where we've suddenly all become aware of ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever we want, of these kind of generative AI systems. That if we went back 3 or 4 years and we were looking at automated speaking tests, we would see it could measure the linguistic features, but it was much more difficult for the automated tests to measure task achievement, even to see whether a response was relevant to the question. But now we can actually create prompts for AI to focus on the specific requirements of a task and to measure all those, as Laura showed with that particular task that she was evaluating, that there were 5 or 6 different aspects to that question that we would want to assess, and we can ask the AI to assess, to listen to to evaluate that response and to see how well the student has actually achieved each of those different elements of the task. So that's where AI has made it the biggest leap forward in the last 2 or 3 years, and has really changed what I think can be done in an automated test, and particularly an automated speaking test. And I suppose that then ultimately, of course, the question we want the answer to is the machine as reliable as a human marker? But I think if we're used to marking tests with humans, we know that humans are not all as reliable as each other. So we're always monitoring and measuring that inter-rater reliability. In other words, we know that there will always be a variation in scoring between different markers. The important thing is to make sure that we use markers, or we train markers to the point where that variation is reduced to an acceptable level. And of course, we also have to keep on monitoring and measuring that to make sure that variation doesn't start to increase, so that if we find that even a marker who's performing very well, that if they have a blip for a 1 or 2 responses, that we are on top of that. So we need to keep a measure of that inter-rater reliability. And so one of the statistical analyses we did with this test was to measure the inter-rater reliability between the machine and human markers. So we wanted to see whether the machine was effectively performing like very good human markers. And here on this slide are some sort of statistics, and we had here 6 expert markers, people who are very used to marking kind of high stakes tests and our AI test. And I think you can see from this immediately that the level of marking reliability is pretty high for all of these markers. And I think the other thing is that if you actually took away the headings, and so you couldn't see who was the AI and who was the human markers, you would have no clue to tell you which was the AI. It sits pretty much in the middle of the level of reliability between all of these, and all of these are good, reliable markers. And I think this was one of the most interesting kind of results for us, is that we found that it was performing really in the same way as the human markers. And again, so this was a slide again from that previous partner who's been using the test with students, and this is more, I suppose this is more anecdotal, because this is just based on this teacher was using with 16 students in this case, and 4 of those students had taken a recent proficiency test, an external test, and when she looked at their scores for speaking in those tests, she found that they did actually match the scores from the DST. Of course, that's not a statistically significant result, but I think it's when you add that to what we've seen on the previous slide, I think it's an encouraging sign to see that this is matching in a range of contexts. And as she says at the bottom there, when she looked at the scores for all of her students and kind of graded them for herself, she found that actually the scores were in line with what she would have given as well. and you know, I think that we know there was a certain amount of skepticism from some of the human markers actually before we introduced them to the dynamic speaking test, and I think we all have some skepticism about what AI can do, because we do know there are areas in which AI can do some strange things. But actually, you know, the process of going through this, not only looking at the statistical analysis, but actually looking at the individual responses, marking them for themselves, comparing their marks with the machine marks. Actually, people felt, you know what, this dynamic speaking test really is working in a way we would feel confident about. And the last thing I wanted to say here was so we talked. I said there that obviously the reliability of the test and the accuracy is kind of the same as with human markers. So in many ways you couldn't tell the difference when you looked at the accuracy of the results. But does that mean that an automated test is actually the same as a test that's been conducted marked by humans? And I think there are some interesting differences. So the first thing is about objectivity, that an automated test, you know, this is a machine. It has no biases. I mean, humans, we try very hard to limit the effect of our biases, but we can't eliminate them completely. As part of the training is that obviously, for example, if we hear somebody who starts very well, we've got to try and ignore that halo effect, that if their first 20 seconds of the first task, they are very good, that's likely to affect the way our expectations about what's going to come, and we have to work very hard not to be affected by that. The machine isn't. The machine will say, okay, that was we'll mark that one entirely on its merits. If it was very good at the start, it'll get a very good score. But if in the second task they're weak, it'll immediately assess that as weak. And one of our interesting experiences is with native speakers who use the test, and they perhaps are thinking, well, I'll take this test, just do the demo very quickly. I'm a native speaker, I'll get a C2. And they find they get a C. Well, they find sometimes they get a B2, and they say, well, obviously this test is not very good. But the point about this is that often they've not used particularly high level language because they've not been really focused on how to meet the requirements of the test. They've just spoken off the cuff in natural language without much preparation. They may well not have fulfilled the task. And the AI is not influenced by the fact that they can't tell that this person who's speaking is a highly competent native speaker or not. They just listen to the response. The machine just listens to the response. It's recorded and judges it against those criteria: language level, task achievement, and so on. And actually, that can be seen as a positive for the test. Test taker experience. You know, I think that there might also be an assumption that working with an automated test, the test taker experience might be less positive. I mean, that most students would prefer to interact with a human speaker. But again, there's quite a lot of research around this which shows that that's far from true for everybody. That whilst obviously some people like to interact with humans, there are other people who actually prefer the anonymity of interacting with an avatar in an automated test. That actually some people find it's that maybe the power dynamics of interacting with a senior human, even if that senior human is trying to be as encouraging as possible, for some people that is actually more stressful than interacting with an automated test. Experience varies. Students are different, learners are different. For some people, an automated test can be a better experience. And we've had feedback from students, not simply about the outcome, the results of the test, but about the experience as well, which shows that many people actually enjoyed using the test. We've tried to make the experience as approachable and accessible as possible. And then I think this final point here is obviously a key point, which is really why we created the dynamic speaking test. Its usefulness for teachers and administrators. You know, the design of a test, everything that Laura talked about there, to create a test that's going to be valid and assess students in an accurate way. That's a time-consuming process. It needs a lot of work. You're going to have to do pre-testing, a lot of people involved. That process is all embedded into our test. You take an automated test like this off the shelf, and all of that work, the CFR underpinning, is built into it. And of course, practicality is, we know that if you want to evaluate a large number of students to evaluate their speaking competence, it's quite a logistical undertaking. You're going to need a lot of people, you're going to need a lot of space, quite a lot of time. With an automated test, of course, the attraction is that you can actually do this all simultaneously. And people can actually use this on a mobile as well as on a desktop. So it becomes a much less difficult undertaking in administrative terms. And finally, the training and marking. You know, again, everything that Laura talked about there, there's a lot of training required, the monitoring to make sure that all of the markers are working to the same standards. But in the case of an automated test, all of that training and marking has been done and is built into the machine. And once that's been done, the machine doesn't get tired, the machine is not erratic, the machine doesn't work to different levels on different days. It's completely consistent, and so in that way you can rely on what you're getting from it. So that really, again, like Laura's talked about CFR, that's kind of a whistle-stop overview of how automated speaking tests work and how AI is helping to achieve that. And just on the last slide, if the slides are available for people, there are a couple of references to if people are interested in that. So yeah, Ian, that was my rapid overview, and hopefully that's within time.
Fantastic, Martin. Thank you. Just goes to show that there's a great deal of thought and complexity in making these or bringing these tests together. Folks, if there's any questions that you might have, please feel free to pop them into the chat. We've had a really interesting one from Zia, Martin. What about the biased aspect of AI in terms of the influence it could bring to the test?
Yeah, look, I mean, that is an interesting question, and yeah, we can't say that there's no bias either, because ultimately, of course, AI is trained on data that has come from humans. But I think that what I said there about having 5,000 samples and having a large number of different features, that is a way that it's more likely to be free from the biases than individual human markers. That's effectively is the goal of the AI, is that it should be taking a huge amount of data and being able to process that, and that's a way of limiting the amount of bias in there.
Yes, very good answer. Any other questions, folks? Okay, well, just before we wrap up, thank you, Martin. Very much appreciate that. Well, here we go from Nicole.
Okay.
Is it possible to distinguish between B2 and B2 plus, for example? B2 is a very wide range. Yes, good point, Nicole. Thoughts, Laura and Martin?
Do you want to say anything on that, Laura, or do you want me to answer?
You can. I think here it's
Yeah.
about really the marking and the scoring mechanisms, maybe.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that within a test that lasts for 15 or 20 minutes, then I think that we wouldn't want to say that we could completely reliable in a valid way say that that is a B2 plus answer. We can give scores that show that according to the sample we've received within that time, that we think this is a higher B2 level or a lower B2 level. But I think, you know, what we say, this isn't a high stakes test where you might want to take a larger sample from the students, and I think that, you know, we would be a little bit cautious about how much nuance we can give, but there are indications within there of differences of higher and lower B2, but we don't want to kind of nail our colours to the mast and say this is definitely a B2 plus response. Would you agree with that, Laura?
Yeah, bearing in mind, as you just said, low stakes and a placement test. So we are providing tasks at different levels. If we were really high stakes, then we would really say, okay, let's look at the B and really zone in there. But at a placement test, we're giving the different tasks. So we can say that they have been performing at a higher level, but you wouldn't really label it as definitely that's a B2 performance. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Any other questions, folks? Okie dokie. So in just wrapping up, I'll just give a 3-minute overview of the dynamic placement test, if I can, and then we'll finish up for the day. Bear with me. Okay, so the dynamic speaking test. For those of you who haven't had a chance to look at it closely to this point, you know, as we discussed, it's an AI graded speaking test, and it delivers that detailed CEFR based report based on the student's ability. I imagine that many of you on this call today are conducting interviews for the purposes of testing a prospective student's speaking ability. Potentially very time and resource heavy exercise, always with that risk of there being some test takers, the person giving the test, their bias in that situation. The advantage of the dynamic placement test is it's flexible. You really can run it. It's online at any time that's of your suiting or the student's suiting, and you're going to remove a lot of that teacher time, administrator's time that's involved in running those tests, and potentially remove that assessor bias as well. It's a 15-minute test, as has been mentioned, really suitable across A1 right through to C2, runs on all of your expected devices, computer, tablet, or mobile, and the essence of the test, the main focus of the test, is 6 real-world tasks in which those responses are recorded, and the areas across which it is testing is pronunciation, fluency, grammar, vocab, and task achievement, specifically around communication. In terms of what the test experience looks like, we've got a couple of questions here which may make up the 6. And if you can read those, dear sir, I'm writing to complain about the recent order. We bought 500 of your alarm clocks. Unfortunately, we've only received 400. Also, we stated we wanted only black alarm clocks, but you sent us a mixture of black and red. And then the task, a customer has sent an email with some problems, can call your boss and leave a voice message with information and a possible solution. So very much real-world tasks test takers are being asked to respond to here. In terms of grading, it's auto-graded, so the results come through very quickly indeed. Martin and Laura, to some degree, touch on this as well. It's statistically calibrated against a very large number of human raters and millions of data points, so the accuracy is quite high, and it has been developed in partnership with TELC, the European testing experts, who I imagine many of you are quite familiar with. So it's a very cost-effective placement test if you're looking to bring speaking into your placement testing practices in a more automated fashion. What a lot of our customers do is combine the dynamic placement test, which is a receptive skills placement test, with the dynamic speaking test to create a 20-minute test covering receptive skills and speaking is another option. And of course, if you're interested in having a look at this test, would like to trial it, or seeking some further information, please feel free to pop a note into the chat, or contact us here at Bookery, where I imagine most of you know where we are. Okay, so in wrapping up, I would very much like to thank Laura and Martin. They have got out of bed quite early to be with us today, and we are very grateful for them making their time available. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Martin. And I would like to thank everyone else who has attended here today and for their questions as well. They're very much appreciated. Really on that note, I would like to wish you, in Laura and Martin's case, a very good morning, and for everybody else here, a fine afternoon. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.